The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the first chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. This is the testimony John gave when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask, "Who are you?" He confessed and did not deny it, but confessed, "I am not the Messiah." And they asked him, "What then? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." Then they said to him, "Who are you? Let us have an answer for those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" He said, "I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, 'Make straight the way of the Lord,' as the prophet Isaiah said." Now they had been sent from the Pharisees. They asked him, "Why then are you baptizing, if you are neither the Messiah, nor Elijah, nor the prophet?" John answered them, "I baptize with water. Among you stands one whom you do not know, the one who is coming after me. I am not worthy to untie the thong of his sandal." This took place in Bethany, across the Jordan, where John was baptizing. The Gospel of the Lord. So, John the Baptist, he is a weird and different kind of guy. And often, when we read the biblical stories about John the Baptist, we focus on that weird and different stuff. Indeed, it can be hard to get past all the weird stuff, even when we try. After all, between Mark's version of John's story that we read last Sunday and the one that I just read today in John, John the Baptist is a guy who wears weird clothes and eats weird stuff. And apparently, that's on purpose. He is trying to attract attention to himself and sort of channel the ancient prophets, all the kind of weird stuff that prophets did with the way that they ate or the way that they dressed. He wants to kind of mimic that a little bit, but it's weird. John the Baptist is a guy who embraces a messed up marketing strategy. He is way out in the desert, far away from the people he is trying to reach. It is a long trek from Jerusalem, and it's not so bad going there because it's all downhill. But coming back, it's all uphill. I've done it several times in a bus with air conditioning. It's not so bad, but for those folks it was. Why would you be there? It's just a messed up marketing strategy. And John the Baptist, he's a guy who doesn't want to answer any questions. Who are you? I am not this guy. I am not this guy. I mean, it's almost like he's trying to give Monty Python material. I am not the Messiah. And he goes on and tells people who he's not. But he doesn't give any good answers about who he is or who he thinks he is. It's almost impossible not to get fixated on these weird and different things about John the Baptist. But actually, there's something even weirder and more different about him. And it's easy to miss if we get fixated on the camel's hair shirt and the wild locusts. The thing that is really different about John is that John actually believed that God was doing a new and different thing right now, in the real world that he was living in and in the real lives of the people he spoke to. And the new thing that God was doing was going to restore hope. It was going to make things better. And if people were willing to be a little different themselves, they would actually get to see and participate in the new and different thing that God was doing. God was actually present now, doing something here. And that was different from what most people, both then and now, actually think. But for John the Baptist, and for the people who heard him, being different and living differently was often hard because it meant more than dressing in funny clothes, eating funny things, or living in funny places. Instead, living differently meant living with the hope and actual expectation that God will be personally involved in your life, giving you blessings and opportunities, even if the world around you seems to be falling apart. Sometimes we also get distracted by the end of the world stuff that characterized John's preaching. But even that stuff presupposes that God is actually present and engaged in the world around you. I don't think anybody needed or wanted to go out to hear John to hear more gloom and doom, which is often what we focus on. And that's because they had plenty of gloom and doom around them all the time. Instead, they went to hear a word of hope that God actually noticed, and God actually cared and was even right now acting, even and especially when nobody else seemed to be talking about hope. Living differently was kind of hard for John and for the people who first heard him because it meant envisioning life outside of the boxes of people's preconceived expectations. The people who came out to question John probably actually did believe that God was going to give them a future. But if that future was happening through John, he had to fit in one of their neat little boxes. You had to be the Messiah, or Elijah, or the prophet. Fit in neatly to one of those expectations. Yeah, he did wear funny clothes like Elijah, but he just didn't fit the part. And part of living into the different thing God is doing is accepting that God may be creating different boxes than you're used to, or perhaps even no boxes at all. And part of living into God's new thing is being open to God working in ways you didn't expect. And living in this new and different way was hard because it meant acting differently, even when you're not sure exactly what this new thing that God is doing is actually doing. I mean, you can't really totally recognize it. We miss this sometimes because John the Baptist, it seems, does not necessarily know who Jesus is at this point. He does not know exactly what Jesus is going to do. In fact, it seems that he was a little bit wrong about it. And later on, he sends word to Jesus' disciples and says, hey, really, are you the one we're supposed to be looking for, or is it somebody else? He's not exactly sure. But he knows that God is about to act. And so he keeps looking and living into this different kind of future, even though the details have not been revealed to him. John lived differently because he knew God was present in our world and doing a new and different thing. And that is still true for us, and that's why we're also called to live in new and often different ways. And like John the Baptist and the folks who first heard him, sometimes being different and living differently means having the audacity to live with hope and expectation that God is actually acting in our lives, even and especially when things seem to be pretty bad all around us. It's easy to get caught up in pessimism and fear. That is often what sells in our world, and that's often what is used to motivate people. But hope and expectation are also invigorating, and they're empowering. And what often made a difference for people in the Bible, and sometimes for us, is that when you look for and expect God to act in your life, you sometimes see it. But when you don't expect it, or even hope for it, you can't see it, even if it's right in front of your face. Part of living differently is simply refusing to stay walled up in pessimism and fear. And a chunk of living differently is simply getting out of bed in the morning sometimes and saying, okay, I'm not going to stay holed up in my fears and all the horrible stuff that I hear going on all around me. It's hard, but it's the first part. Living differently for us also sometimes means envisioning a future that is not contained by our preconceived boxes. The little boxes of expectation that this is the way it's supposed to be. I mean, I know that. I live with those a lot of times. And especially, at this time of year, one of the reasons that Christmas can be stressful for a lot of people is that Christmas doesn't fit into the box of, what it is supposed to be, or what it was like when I was a kid, or what it was like when my kids were little. And so, if we don't get outside of some of those little boxes, we can't see the new and interesting ways of celebrating Christmas in our lives and in our world that are possible, that are objectively good, because they make sense in this new reality that God is giving us right now, and that there are different ways that God is giving us to experience joy. And sometimes for us, living differently simply means acting a little differently, even if the difference is not weird and funny and people don't notice. I don't think, at least I cannot find any evidence in the scriptures of this, that anybody who heard John adopted his dress code or his diet. But apparently, many of them did live into hope by doing things, simple things that he called people to do, like sharing with others, treating people fairly. Things that, by the way, do not matter if the world is going to end tomorrow. But if the world isn't going to end tomorrow, if it's just going to be different, then living differently means finding different ways to share the love of God and the hope of God's future with people around you who need it. John the Baptist, he was a different kind of guy, but because he was different, he was able to see and live into the new and different kind of future that God was bringing about in the life of the world around him. And so in this Advent season, John's example reminds us that we're also called to be a little bit different too. We're called to be different because we're called to look for different things that God is doing right now, to expect that God will make a real difference in our real everyday lives, and to live in different ways so that others will begin to experience God's future through us. Amen.